And we welcome in for the first time to Gamecock Pod Live, Payton Titus from Go Gamecocks and the State Sports. She covers all things Gamecocks, asks very good questions at the press conferences. And so, Payton, welcome to the show and Happy New Year.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. Happy New Year to you as well.
All right, so unlike your predecessor, you are not a Tar Heel, which we like a lot better around here, especially the older demographic, as the hatred of the ACC still lives with that generation, with the boomers. But you're a Gator. And so now you become my third favorite Gator behind Steve Spurrier and my guy at WOLO TV 25 in Columbia, Mike Gillespie.
Yeah, fair enough. Those are two good ones for sure. So I'll take it. I'll take third.
All right, so obviously we're just a couple of days removed from the greatest day in the history of the college football playoff in the final iteration of the four-team playoff. Both games, nail biters, went to the wire. Usually it's been two blowouts, one good game, one blowout, but we have an overtime game and then a game that is literally decided on the final play of the game in the last second of the game. And for the first time since 2014, there will not be an SEC team in the college football playoff national championship. Just your thoughts first. Let's start with Alabama, Michigan. I really thought that was probably the national championship game. But everybody on the East Coast got to see what diehard college football fans got to see, and that was the Michael Penix show, even though that game was later than anticipated because of overtime. But just your thoughts on the Rose Bowl and that Alabama-Michigan classic.
Yeah, that game was wild. I was watching it and I was like, this is so chaotic from the beginning. Like all the muffed punts and the weird snaps and all that stuff was so odd. And I felt like kind of unlike teams, like we saw them in the game and people were tweeting, they were like, oh, yeah, this is like the greatest stupid game ever. And I was like, I feel like if it wasn't Michigan and Alabama and we were watching this, we would have different opinions on that. But it definitely, I mean, to go into overtime in the Rose Bowl, like that's wild. So that's obviously instant classic material. But yeah, I definitely thought, never count Nick Saban out. So I was anticipating a Texas-Alabama rematch in the final, which I think would have been fun. But it's nice to see new teams in this space. So yeah, I definitely, that was a hectic game, a chaotic game. But it was fun to watch, especially for me not having any kind of like stake in the game. I could not imagine if I was a Michigan or Alabama fan, I would have been up in arms like the whole game. It was just chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. It was, a game. Lou Holtz used to always say you never have the same team in a bowl game that you have throughout the season. You really never have the same team 2 weeks in a row because of injuries, guys' mental and emotional state. Now you've got this whole new dynamic of the transfer portal, guys checking out, guys being tampered with. And then you have, for Alabama and Michigan, unbelievable seasons. And then you have to sit and wait over 3 weeks to play a game. And, clearly Michigan was not sharp, particularly Alabama dominated special teams and really had the game won. I just thought it was too many errors by Alabama's defense, and credit Jim Harbaugh and their offensive staff because they wreaked havoc on Kevin Steele and former Gamecock defensive back coach Travaris Robinson. I thought Alabama's defense just got it outcoached and exposed.
Yeah, I definitely felt like watching that game, it wasn't about who was going to win, it was who was going to lose because of all those mistakes you were talking about. So it was definitely an interesting watch. Yeah, it, it was just it was just weird.
Yeah, so the game goes to overtime. Michigan scores rather easily. Alabama 4th and goal from the 3. And they had not ran the football up the middle well the entire game. They dominated the second half of the game basically by attacking the perimeter of Michigan's defense. And I just thought it was a very questionable play call and then a really bad read when you look at it on replay. If Jalen Milroe follows his guard, he probably scores, but he just cuts it inside and ran into the brick wall that has been Michigan's defensive front.
Yeah, I definitely thought that was an odd choice, especially considering, speaking of their front, I mean, Jalen Milroe was on his back so often during that game, so I don't really know why that was the choice. But yeah, ultimately, just weird. I was surprised that Nick Saban would call that play because I really thought he would pull that out. Like he would not get out coached in that situation, but here we are.
I didn't really mind a quarterback run, but I would have liked to seen something on the perimeter with a run pass option. But that's just me. So then the nightcap, which got started later in East Coast time, a lot of people couldn't stay up late and watch at least the second half of the Michael Penix show, but certainly a lot of fireworks. That first game was a lot of defense. The second game, it's 21-all at the half. Washington ends up pulling it out. I really thought Michael Penix Jr. should have won the Heisman. He had the best season of any quarterback, and he didn't play for a 3-loss team that couldn't even win their division. And he led his team to an unbeaten season in a conference championship. And now you have 2 14-0 teams playing for the national championship in what is now an all Big Ten national championship game because the Pac-12 disintegrated on New Year's Eve. Your thoughts on Texas and Washington? I picked Washington in that one because I just don't think you can trust Quinn Ewers. The dude is from a wealthy family. It's in South Lake Carroll. He looks like a guy that lives under a bridge on 6th Street in downtown Austin, which is only about 25 minutes from my house. But I just thought the difference in that game, other than the last minute when Washington made 2 or 3 critical errors, it all came down to quarterback play. And Michael Penix Jr. did not disappoint.
Yeah, he made some really crazy throws, and his receivers made plays. During that game, it was wild to watch him throw, like off one foot, falling toward the ground and all these things. So, yeah, he if I had a Heisman vote, he would have had my Heisman vote. I definitely thought going into these 2 games that one was going to be a little bit more of a toss-up. I didn't think that Michigan was going to break its playoff woes necessarily against Alabama, especially after everything they had been through that year. I would think that and the SEC championship game would have been the games that Nick Saban was like, we are not going to lose these games. But no, I mean, both games were very exciting. It was really fun watching Michael Penix and his receivers play, and I like seeing Washington in the final. It's nice to see, like I said earlier, it's nice to see new teams in the college football playoff championship game after so long, seeing the same people go back. Yeah, all in all, a very entertaining night. I feel like the first game, I don't know, I haven't seen numbers for the second game yet, but I feel like the first game, the Rose Bowl, was like the best viewed college football playoff game since 2018 or something. So, they definitely delivered on that.
No doubt about it. I think Kalen DeBoer at Washington is a rising star. I've been on him since he was Tom Allen's offensive coordinator at Indiana. No surprise to me, and he resurrected the career of Michael Penix Jr. After he left to take, I believe, the Fresno State job. Penix was an interception machine. Then he got injured again, 4 straight years with injuries. You got to give that guy credit for his perseverance. He goes to Washington in the last 2 seasons. He's really been maybe the most dynamic player in college football. And the nation will get to see, although it will be a tall task. Washington is a little undersized on the offensive line. I don't know how that 275-pound setter is going to hold up against Michigan's defensive front. But really nothing would surprise me. And so as we get ready to transition to Gamecock football, will Monday night's game be Jim Harbaugh's final game in college football? A lot of NCAA trouble, a lot of Big Ten trouble. And he just hired a new agent who specializes in the National Football League. I have to think Harbaugh wants to go out on top with a national championship and probably becomes the next head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think that's an unlikely scenario necessarily. It's such an odd situation at Michigan, and it's interesting to me because you see with these players and him, all their interactions that they have together, there's a lot of love there. But also, at the same time, coaches and players, they got to look out for what's best for them, what they think is best for them. So I don't think it would be wild for him to get his national championship, or I guess not necessarily wild. Like, it would be a little bit wild, but like not unlikely for him to be like, yep, okay, I won, I did the thing, and now on to the next, especially just with the way that college football is evolving, he's been pretty outspoken about wanting players to get revenue sharing and money and being open to NIL and things like that. But, you got to think that very stressful job trying to navigate all of those things. And so if there was an opportunity that he felt like he could take and do good things with at another level where he didn't have to deal with those things, I don't think that would be an outlandish transition or an impossible transition.
I agree. I think Jim Harbaugh is very likely to the NFL, but he's kind of like Spurrier. He and Mike Leach. He's somewhere on the spectrum. I mean, he's just an odd dude. He's a football genius. So I guess we will see. So one thing that you can never be surprised with anymore, even though it was surprised yesterday, Grayson Pup Howard announced he was entering the transfer portal over the break. Stone Blanton, starting linebacker, announced he was hitting the transfer portal. I think the Gamecocks are up to at least 20 players now that they've lost in the transfer portal. True freshman athlete Cameron Sandlin also hit the portal yesterday. I think he was kind of a guy without a position, but losing a starting linebacker and losing a player that just less than 12 months ago, Shane Beamer said was calling him, telling him he was willing to die for this program. What's the level of concern there? Because I'm not saying either one of these guys can't be replaced, because quite frankly, Stone Blanton, in my opinion, was one of the worst starting linebackers in the Southeastern Conference. Pup Howard is from Jacksonville. And quite frankly, anybody in the recruiting industry will tell you that 4-star guys out of Jacksonville, beware, because they have a high bust rate. I never thought he was a linebacker, not at 6'4", 245. I mean, he's going to be, wherever he goes, he's going to be 255 or 260 by the spring. But is there cause for alarm within Shane Beamer's program, losing players like Stone Blanton and Pup Howard?
I think it's tough because obviously you don't want to see, 21 guys leave your program, especially after, the messaging throughout the season and after the season was that, everybody was kind of dedicated to the mission and things like that and wanting to improve the program and take it to higher heights. But, I also think it's important to remember and keep in perspective that, it's not only South Carolina who's losing guys in this kind of volume. And Shane Beamer is a great recruiter, obviously. This class that he brought in, mining the transfer portal and high school as well, he seems to be doing a good job. It's tough, and I can understand the perspective from fans where it's like, Shane Beamer arguably overachieved his first couple years at South Carolina and then underachieved this year. And so it's kind of like, well, how do we manage our expectations for the trajectory of how this team is supposed to go under him? So I think it'll be interesting this year to see kind of how things work because, he's talked about balancing recruiting between the transfer portal and high school and trying to figure out, in this skill position, we need experience. So I'm going to go to the transfer portal for running backs because we don't have the time to develop anybody. Really, we need a starter and a go-to guy now. So then doing that, but then also being like, okay, well, as far as our offensive line troubles, let's keep going to high school and see if we can develop guys and help them gain the experience while they're here to do something special for us and create a more, reliable front. So I understand the cause for concern. I understand fans, being worried, but I also think it's important to just remember that, like, this isn't not an only South Carolina problem. This is a problem that everybody's having to adapt to. And so it's just going to be a matter of, how things kind of shake out next year as he tries to balance youth and newcomers from the transfer portal.
No doubt. So South Carolina will play host to at least three official visitors today from the transfer portal. And that is starting on the offensive line, a guy that they recruited out of high school. He went to Illinois, was a bounce back from JUCO to Houston, a 3-year starter. And that is Ruben Unige, 6'5", 310 pounds. He would have 1 year of eligibility. He can play left tackle, right tackle. Of course, South Carolina was forced to start a true freshman at left tackle. They have a 5-star left tackle who is in San Antonio turning heads now in Dillon native Josiah Thompson, who will be on campus after this week. But you'd really like a seasoned veteran at left tackle. Jalen Nichols was going to be that guy. He's out. And so Ruben Unige will be on campus this week. A lot of people think the Gamecocks are in a great spot for him. I think it would be a great add to add an experienced player to some other veterans that are returning, but also a lot of really young and super talented guys on the offensive line.
Yeah, definitely. That position seemed to be snake bit this year. That position group, I guess, in the offensive line. And so you got to feel pretty good, I would imagine, about Tree and Tro having all that experience from last year coming into this year. And hopefully that will parlay into some more polished play and, getting strength up and hoping that there aren't a lot of injuries there as well. So, yeah, Josiah Thompson obviously is a huge get. And yeah, it would not hurt to have more experience. You've got some guys returning as well, so hopefully they can kind of just mesh together, because I think one of the problems with potentially trying to get a bunch of O-linemen from the portal is that you got to figure out how you all mesh together, because it's a very collaborative position group. And so I think there is merit in trying to keep a lot of guys together throughout their college career, so that way they can keep developing that chemistry with each other. But, obviously it's not bad to bring somebody in who has more experience and can help mentor younger guys in the group and things like that. So, after this year, we feel like they can use all kinds of help there, and hopefully that will bode well for them next season with the tough schedule they've got ahead.
No doubt about it. So then at linebacker, Gamecocks over the next 3 days will bring in 3 inside linebackers. I think they want to take at least 2 of them. 2 are very experienced. Demetrius Knight, 6'2", 247. He comes in today. He played at Georgia Tech for 3 years this past year at Charlotte, where he tallied 96 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. That is a veteran guy. Tomorrow, Bangali Kamara, who I personally think is a definite starter should he choose the Gamecocks, from Pitt, teammates with transfer portal defensive lineman DeAndre Jules, 6'2", 230, in 47 games at Pitt. 21 starts over the last 2 years, 104 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and an interception. Those guys, along with Arkansas linebacker Manny Powell, 6'3", 231, who's a younger guy but an upside guy, you would add them to 2 high school All-American linebackers, as well as Debo Williams, Bam Martin Scott, Jerron Willis, and maybe Mo Kaba if he can get back healthy and really create a healthy linebacker room.
Yeah, that's definitely, we talked earlier about Stone, Blanton, and Pup Howard entering the portal, and Stone and Debo played so many snaps last year. So obviously that's a huge hit. So that's definitely a position group that they want to bolster. And yeah, so you definitely want to bring some guys in there, some experienced guys in there, because, we heard from Shane Beamer last year about wanting to rotate more guys in through that position and not have Debo and Stone take so much of the load, because, that wouldn't be sustainable, and we don't want them to get injured. We don't want them to get fatigued and things like that. And so it'll be interesting to see how he develops this youth as well over the course of the next season, because there were conversations about Pup Howard being college ready for so much of the time that he was here. And then, we didn't see him play a lot of snaps. So I'm intrigued to see what that position group looks like and how many guys they're able to rotate through there. Because I feel like they were saying it would be ideal to rotate like 4 guys in through a game or something. And that did not happen a lot of the time. So hopefully that's something that they can improve on. So that way there's not so much that Debo and other older guys have to shoulder.
I agree. On defense, you really want to be able to roll at least 4 defensive ends, 5 defensive tackles. If you're playing 2 linebackers, you want to play at least 4. When you go to the 3-3-5, you get into guys that can play multiple positions, like Bam Martin Scott, Jordan Strong, who is now departed. I think JT Gear can play standing up or with his hand in the dirt. I think it'll be the same for 2 guys who are in Orlando this week. And so 7 Gamecock signees are in Orlando for the Under Armour All-America game, which will be played tonight. And then 2 more are in San Antonio for the All-America Bowl, which will be played on Saturday afternoon in San Antonio. 9 of the Gamecock 16 high school signees are in All-America games. I dare say nobody else has over half their signing class in these 2 All-America games. That is a big plus for Shane Beamer. And so you've got really one player at every position on the field except running back. Dante Reno, your quarterback signee, DeBron Gatling, who was a signing day addition at wide receiver, tight end Michael Smith, offensive lineman Cam Pringle, who is in Orlando but will not play, consensus 5-star Dylan Stewart, who may be the best player in Orlando and is a guy that should be an instant impact guy. Another guy I love, outside linebacker Wendell Gregory. I think both of these guys are ready-made for that 3-3-5 defense. And then cornerback Jalewis Solomon, who also will not play. But Gamecocks are one of 3 teams with 7 signees in the Under Armour game. Just how big is that for Shane Beamer?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like what I was saying before. Shane is a great recruiter, and talking to guys that he emphasizes relationship building. And I thought it was interesting and smart how at his signing day press conference he made sure, even if a guy wasn't specifically asked about during the press conference, at the end he took time to be like, okay, who have I not talked about? So that way he's putting in the effort and showing these guys that he cares about them and that he wants them to do well. And I think that's important because so much of there's so much to consider with college recruiting nowadays. Like if you're a player or if you're the family of a player, you have to take into account the school, you have to take into account the opportunities that you're going to get there, the relationships of, who are you entrusting with your son for the next 4 years or however many years or whatever. And then you have to take into account, different opportunities with NIL collectives and things like that. So it's a lot going on. And I think it's important at the root of it to be like, are you someone that a family is comfortable with leaving your child with? And so doing those different things, making a show, through Twitter. I believe Shane had reposted a graphic that they made for all the guys in these all-star games the other day, shouting them out and everything. And so, doing these gestures and stuff, I think are part of why he's so good at recruiting. And I think that's something that Gamecocks fans should take solace in when they're seeing all the news of these transfer portal departures, and just know that, he's working to reload things and not all is lost. There's a long time before they get back on the field and play competition. So.
All right, good stuff. So Juice Wells will arguably be the biggest loss to the transfer portal. Gamecocks trying to restock the wide receiver room with already Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina. Today they will host Louisville transfer and Dillon native, same high school as Josiah Thompson. Amari Huggins-Bruce, productive but a rotational guy, 80 receptions, 1,100 yards over 3 seasons. He will be on campus today. Gamecocks expected to host Gage Larvadane, who was the Max leading receiver at Miami of Ohio this week, as well as James Madison wide receiver Elijah Surratt, and possibly others, just like Wes Mitchell from Gamecock Central. Gamecocks are also hosting North Carolina Central and FCS All-American Torricelli Simpkins on a visit today, 6'5", 320 pounds. So another transfer portal offensive lineman. And the biggest thing, Payton, on offense, this team, I think they're good at tight end. They got Brady Cook. They return, multiple players at the tight end position. They have Michael Smith, who's a high school All-American. But really restocking this wide receiver room, if you're South Carolina, you would like to sign at least 3 more portal wide receivers.
Yeah, that is a position that Shane Beamer brought up in his signing day press conferences to this is a group that we still need to attack in the transfer portal because they lost a lot of production there. And that's another, skill position where it's we need somebody who's ready to start now. So definitely huge, and will be interesting to see as well because quarterback is another position that he said he was still looking for in the transfer portal because even though they have Lenore Sellers and he in the limited playing time that he had this year, he appears to be, a very talented guy that they could probably rely on. But at the same time, they have Luke Doty is still going to play as a wide receiver, but kind of try and stay in that quarterback room to help kind of counsel guys, I guess, sort of is the way that Shane was kind of explaining it. So you want to bring somebody in there also who can help foster competition and just have depth and everything because you also lost a couple of backups to the transfer portal as well. So I think those 2 positions obviously are very key, but it'll be interesting to see who they get as far as wide receiver room additions, but then also what happens with the quarterback position. And I thought it was interesting too how Shane brought up in his press conference about trying to find somebody in the portal. Guys want a day 1 starting job, and he's not willing to commit to that for anybody. He wants to bring people in and see how they look and see how they can compete and kind of have an iron sharpening iron situation going on. And then from there being okay, let's assess this and figure out who can help us win football games the best and then move from there. So these 2 position groups feel kind of intertwined to me, and I'm interested to see what ends up happening with them after having somebody really reliable in Spencer Rattler. And then the last couple of years, you had Juice Wells and then Xavier Leggett, who were very obvious number 1 options who were incredibly productive and helpful for him and Coach Beamer. So,
no doubt. So one quarterback to monitor in the transfer portal is Florida State transfer Tate Rodemaker. It's expected he will visit South Carolina this weekend. I think he is a guy that, would be a quality option. I mean, you can't promise anybody the starting position. If South Carolina was in the same position they were in when Spencer Rattler transferred, there's no doubt in my mind South Carolina would have made a big splash and gone out and gotten one of these top name guys from the portal because of how well Spencer Rattler played at South Carolina in the development under Shane Beamer and Dowell Loggins this year. But guys want to start. Shane Beamer can only promise them the opportunity to compete. And everybody knows, and I'm not willing to put him in the Hall of Fame just yet. I would have been totally on board if they would have brought in KJ Jefferson because he's the same type of quarterback as Lenore Sellers. But when you have Sellers there, who is a higher ceiling guy, and you have Dowell Loggins, who was around KJ Jefferson for 2 years, and now around Lenore Sellers, he has a good idea of who can do what, even though Sellers hadn't gotten the opportunity yet. And so it will be interesting to see who they bring in to compete with Lenore Sellers. And I don't want to sell Dante Reno short. He's the head coach, the son of a head coach, an Ivy League head coach. And when I interview him, I'm definitely not the smartest guy on the call. So I'm interested to see how he competes. And it will be interesting to see how the quarterback and wide receiver position, like you say, ends out in this portal session and then again in the spring, because I do think there is at least one wide receiver the Gamecocks could add as a graduate transfer. All right, so let's talk about something that was also a surprise, and that is South Carolina women's basketball. It only took 1 week for them to reclaim the number one spot in the polls. They're 12-0. They enter conference play this week. They'll travel to Gainesville to take on your alma mater, the Florida Gators. How shocking was it just from Paris, from the first game to the Maryland game, to see this team play and to see the depth, and really, in all my years, to me, the biggest difference with this team is they are a knockdown, three-point shooting perimeter team that can also kill you inside. And that knockdown three-point shooting has really been the only thing that's probably kept Dawn Staley from having at least 3 or 4 national championships at this point.
Yeah, they are so much fun to watch. They're so much fun to watch. I think in the preseason, at least among local media, everybody, knew that this was an extremely talented team. And I think everybody kind of thought, talent-wise, this is a Final Four team. Now we just kind of have to wait and see, what do they all look like together? How do they mesh? Because, this was a team with a lot of new faces, whether it be freshmen or, the couple of transfers that they brought in. And aside from those actual, just new people, you had people who had been there, but now they were taking on completely different roles than they had ever had before. And so I think it's really interesting to listen to Coach Dawn Staley talk about that and talk about how, because our first availability of the preseason was at the end of September at an open practice. And she was like, yeah, during the summer, things reminded me of my very first season, 2008, 2009, which I don't know if people remember the record from them, but they went 10-18 and they struggled. And, because she was trying to build something new, but she was like, as far as the newness and as far as, my worry as to, I don't really know how this is going to shake out. That's what she was reminded of. And then for them to turn around now and have, at least through the non-conference slate, better statistics than her freshies teams is really wild. So I think when we all watched the Notre Dame game, we knew that this was going to be a good team and a good game, but just to see how well it seemed that they already, kind of knew each other and how well they were able to play off each other and how productive they were able to be was really the surprise, because defense obviously has been a hallmark of Dawn Staley's teams, but for them to have several games where they score 100+ points, I don't think people really predicted that. But yeah, it's been so much fun to watch. And it was an easy decision to put them at number one after that first week. And then now it's just kind of like, what's going to happen to really kind of knock them from that point? I think it'll be interesting come into conference play because the SEC is shaping up to not be quite as strong as it has been in years past, while the Pac-12 is going out with a bang this year. And so it'll be interesting to see, because right now it feels like it's South Carolina, UCLA, and then you kind of have everyone else. So, how are they going to shape up through their conference slates and what are we going to see come March?
And the Pac-12 may be the deepest and toughest conference in the country in its final season, just like in football. It was the best year in history for the Pac-12. And they decide, well, we're tired of this. We're just going to move on to something else. I do agree, at least through this part of the season, I think it's South Carolina, it's UCLA, and then it's everybody else. And quite frankly, if there was a third team I would put, as much as I despise her, I would have to put LSU, because they are deep. Kim Mulkey is a great coach, and she has her team firing on all cylinders now, and she was not afraid to address some discipline issues with Angel Reese early in the season. And so I do think LSU is a team you have to consider. They just don't have a point guard. And South Carolina has 4 point guards. And they also have probably the tallest team in the country as well. And so quickly looking at the stats, 91 points per game while allowing 50 points per game, over 41-point scoring margin. This team is shooting 52% from the field on the season. They are shooting 42% from three. And to me, the one wart and the biggest concern I have for this team is free throw shooting. They are only shooting 64%, which is like number 296 in Division I basketball. And quite frankly, there's no excuse for Chloe Kitts to be around a 50% free throw shooter, or Ashlyn Watkins, or Malaysia Fulwiley, who has not shot well from the free throw line. This team is deep. They're talented. I would have to say Tahina Paopao has been the non-conference MVP of the team because she's just such a seasoned veteran and a knockdown three-point shooter. She's shooting 53% from behind the arc. Just your thoughts on the guard play and the concern about the free throw shooting.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the free throw shooting first because it was interesting after the ECU game. Coach Staley was asked about that. And she was basically saying, we've been trying to work these into drills and practice, but it's one of those things where it's like you don't want to put a ton of emphasis on it because you don't want to psych people out, but you also obviously have to get better at this. So I'm intrigued to see how that problem will shape up moving forward, because that's definitely the one thing it seems like, this is the problem, because there were a few games where it was like, okay, turnover numbers are not looking great, but then they really shaped that up. I think Bowling Green and Presbyterian and even ECU was a game where it was like this team leads the nation in forced takeaways, so that was a good showing in terms of improvement on that front. But yeah, free throw shooting is not great. Asia Wilson tweeted, she was like, I know Coach Boyer is hot about this free throw shooting. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how they fix that. And then in terms of the guard play, like I went to SEC Media Days in Birmingham and asked Coach Staley about Tina Paopao, because the thought with her heading into the season was, she is the 3-point shooting prowess that Dawn Staley's bringing in, trying to fill that hole on her team. She's an experienced player, so that can help in terms of like the leadership void. But then one of the main things that Dawn Staley went to her about and was like, I need you to improve this, is her defense. And, she's obviously that's something that she has taken seriously. But then further on in her answer, Dawn Staley went on to say that she doesn't think she's ever had a lead guard pairing like Raven Johnson and Tina Paopao. And I was like, coming from Dawn Staley, like the point guard, that's a crazy. So I put a lot of stock into that answer. And then now we've seen that play out throughout the season. It's really fun watching Tina and Raven because they're kind of like fire and ice in a way, where Raven is just like high speed all the time and she can make some really cool, really flashy plays. But then sometimes, Coach Staley's talked about this, her tempo brings everybody else's tempo up when she's running the floor, and not everybody can always keep up with that. And so that's where you have some mistakes made. But then Tahina really is able to slow things down and play a little bit more methodically. And her basketball IQ, as we've seen, is off the charts. The way that, she had a really smart foul at the end of the Utah game, And just the way that she's able to make passes and set up plays for her teammates while also, not hesitating to take a 3-point shot. And every time she throws it up, like, you have faith that it's going to go in. She's made at least 2 3-pointers in every single game that she's played at South Carolina while shooting, that like 50 something percent, which is wild. And it feels, watching it, you're like, oh my gosh, how sustainable is this? But then she does it every game. So yeah, it's been really fun to watch. And then obviously Malaysia and Tessa are awesome to watch as well, because Malaysia has these magical moments that she's like a walking highlight reel. And that's something, she has those moments, and then she has her moments in between where it's like she really wants to make a play. She really wants to do something impactful, and it doesn't always work. Interesting to hear Coach Staley talk about her in that way. When I talked to her the other day, she was like, the meat and potatoes of basketball is, what happens between those really flashy, exciting plays. So watching Malaysia grow over the course of the season has been cool to watch. And one thing that Coach Staley has talked about at length is, this team is young, and so I want them to make new mistakes. Like, I want to tell them that this is something they need to improve on. They improve on it, and then the next time something happens, it's not that thing I already talked to them about. And Malaysia is a great example of that. We saw her play only like 3 minutes at UNC when she had been averaging like 25 or something going into that game because she missed a few defensive assignments. And Coach Staley, seeing so much of herself in her, knowing Malaysia for so long, knowing that she has the potential to be an amazing basketball player, calling her generational from her first game onward, she doesn't necessarily have the patience for that. So she's like, I'm going to take you out and we're going to talk about defense. And then, you turn around, and at the Duke game on that same road trip, she played clutch minutes for them because she fixed that thing. And then, fouling and turnovers were an issue. And I think it was the Presbyterian game that she played. She ended that with no turnovers and no fouls, which was huge. So that's been fun. And then Tessa is just so polished. Her mechanics and everything are really smooth. And so I think for her, the thing that we've heard from Coach Staley and seen in game is that she just kind of has to trust herself a little bit more and trust her shot, because she can shoot. And so, yeah, it's just like all around, it's been really fun to watch. It's been really cool to see them get to know each other better and play better throughout the year. One thing that I thought was really interesting from the Notre Dame game was that wild pass that Malaysia had to Tina Papa that made Dawn Staley like throw her arms up and walk toward the sideline. And I was like, talking to Tahina after the game, she was like, I didn't know that she even saw me until the pass was coming at me. And so I was like, but you still caught it and you made the layup. So like, you guys are anticipating these things. You know each other. So, all this stuff indicates to me that they're just going to improve as the year goes on. Because when I think about Malaysia's playing that way, I think of, reading Jeff Perlman and reading about how Magic Johnson in his first preseason camp would like throw these passes to his players and they hit him on the side of the head and he'd be like, what are you doing? And he's like, why are you not looking for my no look pass? So yeah, it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. Another player, Breezy Hall, or as I like to call her, Threezy Hall, after a slow start, she's really picked it up. She is 43% from downtown. I think she is another veteran presence that has waited her turn. And you see it in big moments, in close games. She hits clutch shots. I think she's really critical. And then I'm intrigued to see how the post rotation evolves in SEC play. We've been seeing Chloe Kitts. She has put on some muscle, but at times she still gets overpowered a little bit. Then you've got Ashlyn Watkins, who deadlifts 400 pounds and can be a bully. And I really think going back to that North Carolina game, I don't really think North Carolina's point guard realized how close she was to probably losing all of her teeth, because you don't mess with Ashlyn Watkins. And then a player who's been playing well as of late, Sanaya Fagan, and then you still have Sakima Walker, who I think is still adjusting to the speed of Division I basketball after being in junior college, but certainly not a lack of talent at the post position for South Carolina.
Yeah, definitely. It's been interesting to see because, you start with Camilla Cardozo and Chloe Kitts, and then you rotate in Ashlyn Watkins. And it feels like, to me, Ashlyn and Chloe are a really good kind of defensive pairing. So, seeing that change throughout the game is interesting, because Camilla, she obviously is incredibly productive. She's had, I think ECU was her 6th double-double of the season. But then also seeing how, they don't have the experience or the versatility, I feel like, that they had in Aaliyah Boston on this team, because Aaliyah Boston could play the 4 or the 5 kind of, and she was just her IQ was off the charts. And so all of this stuff is it's interesting to see them kind of rotate through, and everybody's really productive and scoring. And Ashlyn has her bully blocks that always are really incredibly fun to watch. And so just watching everybody kind of figure out, how do I how much am I facilitating? How much am I trying to create space for myself and take mid-range shots versus, trying to lay it up? Because I know that Coach Staley wants more productivity from the post players, and a lot of that will come from more experience, I think. But at the same time, she's talked about wanting Camilla to take more mid-range shots and not just, kind of stay in the charge circle for the most part, because that would elevate her game here, but then it would also elevate her draft stock in the WNBA if she can show that she has that in her arsenal. So yeah, and it's really interesting too, because it's like you look at the numbers and we talk about 3-point shooting, but the post productivity is still there. It just looks different and feels a little different from years past.
No doubt. So Adele Tack, 6'6" signee from here in Texas, South Grand Prairie High School. Her senior season was cut short due to a dislocated kneecap. She will enroll at South Carolina today, I believe, and have her surgery, do her rehab, and get ready for next year. And I really hate it for her, because I thought if she had a big senior season, she would end up probably a top 10 player in the country. So hopefully you guys will get a chance to meet with her soon as well. She's a great interview. And so, Payton, I can't thank you enough for being with us. Hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you again once conference play gets up and rolling. And great job today, and we will look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Thank you so much.